times are a-changing, as they say. Seemingly every week, some mind-blowing science news story comes down the pike, covering everything from space, all areas of science really, to the exploration of space, which is ramping up at a breakneck speed. My guest today has his pulse directly on all of it as both a science fiction writer and as a science journalist at Universe Today.
Welcome to Event Horizon with John Michael Godier. In today's episode, John is joined by Matt Williams. Matt Williams is the curator of Universe Today's Guide to Space. He is also a freelance writer, a science fiction author, and a Taekwondo instructor. He is the author of The Cronian Incident and the Jovian Manifesto.
Welcome everyone to Event Horizon with me, John Michael Godier. If you enjoy what you hear, fall into the Event Horizon, hit the like button, and become an active subscriber by ringing the bell. Matt Williams, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Now, Matt, I've been reading your articles on Universe Today for years and years. One of my go-to sources, essentially, for what I do. How long have you been doing this over there?
Well, I technically have been doing it since 2010. And I say technically because back then, for about a year and a half, I did short little articles for Guide to Space. But it was as of 2014 that I became a regular contributor. Yeah, and as of 2015, I became the curator of the Guide to Space. So, yeah, ordinarily, I would say that I've only really done it since 2014, at least in the capacity that I'm now doing it. So, yeah, about 5 years.
Now, out of all of the most recent space news, last 6 months, say, what really excites you the most? Which one really threw you for a loop?
That is a good question. But yeah, it would probably be the arrival of Borisov, mainly because, yeah, the arrival of oumuamua had triggered so much excitement and a lot of anticipation, a lot of the possibilities that were being explored there. Just that the idea that it could, in fact, be an artificial object was really exciting, but the fact that, no matter what, we just didn't know, and that this represented a whole new class object. And then we got to see a second one, an interstellar object there, and I thought, oh my, that's really, really exciting. Yeah, that the fact that this represented sort of a new wave in astronomy. We've seen a few in the last few years there, the discovery of gravitational waves, for example, and it's like, well, that's revolutionary, so new era ahead. And now it's, well, we've just spotted an interstellar object and tracked it, and so new era in astronomy there. So yeah, I'd say probably its arrival in our solar system.
Now, of these two objects, we have, of course, oumuamua and then now borisov, and they couldn't be more different in their behavior because oumuamua does not appear to have been a comet. Yet Borisov looks just like a regular comet you would find in the solar system. It just happens to be from some other solar system.
Yes.
So what are the ideas that, why are these two things so radically different?
Well, I would say it's because Borisov doesn't defy classification, right? I mean, astronomers, the second they noticed it, astronomers were quite certain that it was a comet, and its behavior ever since has totally confirmed that. It's indicated to us that, yes, in fact, it's forming a tail as it gets closer to the sun, flaring up real nice, whereas oumuamua, it really defied any conventional classification, and as far as I can tell, it still is. I mean, in the first instance, it was swinging by Earth, and they thought it was a comet initially. Then they realized it never had a tail, so we guess it's an asteroid. But then it accelerated like a comet, and there were a number of returns that came back in terms of spectra that they got from analyzing it. They said that, well, it may be icy, but we think we're seeing more rock here than otherwise. And then there were mixed results in terms of what they were able to glean from it. So the idea that it could in fact be an extraterrestrial object, or that it was a piece of an extraterrestrial craft, something of that nature, I mean, that actually, part of what made that so very neat was that, yeah, there's enough ambiguity here with this object that you can't rule that out. Its arrival's what got everyone so excited that more would be coming. So, yeah, in a way, Borisov is a little bit less exciting because it's like, oh yeah, yep, that's a comet for sure. Yep, look at it.
Well, I think what would be interesting is if it, because we're going to find more of these objects. Interstellar objects are now on the menu for us, and if it turns out that everything looks like oumuamua and Borisov was the odd man out, I think that would be the most interesting scenario, wouldn't you think?
Oh yes, absolutely. And yeah, I for one am really looking forward to that there. And one thing that I've seen a lot of in terms of comments that we got at UT on Twitter or our comment boards is, can we please go explore one of these? To those people, I'm actually excited to say, well, actually, we're looking into that very thing. There is a mission actually that will be able to do that in the coming years, and there are other people who are looking to do something more radical, like a breakthrough starshot type idea. If we could create a solar sail with a little wafer craft and just accelerate the stink out of it, it would be able to catch up to an object that's leaving our solar system. And we could basically watch it go and stay with it as it goes interstellar. And that's absolutely fantastic, really.
Yeah, it's amazing. And this is becoming possible now, these little micro spacecraft. Whereas previously, but we also have things that are going to find more interstellar objects, like the LSST, for example. When it starts taking all sky surveys, we're going to see stuff.
Yeah. Well, that too was something that I thought was really exciting, was the revelation that all of this has happened before, right? With interstellar objects entering our solar system. And some of these are actually, they would have stayed. So yeah. Getting a better idea of what is out there just in our solar system is going to probably reveal some really interesting things. And I wonder are we going to look at the main asteroid belt or at the Jupiter's Trojans and Greeks and see that in fact there's all kinds of probes littered there? And
well, that's it. You have to ask that question because over the course of the last 4.5 billion years, who knows what's accumulated there? And one thing that civilizations do is produce trash, Yeah. We know that we do it. So there could be artifacts there, defunct probes or, almost anything that could have accumulated over a very, very long period of time. They may not be active anymore, but it's worth a look.
Yeah. And I can just imagine Fermi rolling over in his grave as if to think, yeah, all this time now we've been wondering, where's the proof, where's the evidence of extraterrestrials? The second we got our proper eyes on, we found that, well, there's no shortage of evidence, actually. We just couldn't see it. And that is, I think, a more frightening prospect than a fun possibility to know that extraterrestrials are actually very common.
Yeah, because you don't know. I mean, there's some thinking in other areas of singularities and things like that where you end up as a machine civilization at some point. And that seems to happen fairly quickly from the dawn of civilization until the technology age that we're in now. And we're almost to that capability. So therefore, most of these species out there may be machines. And how comfortable are we with that idea?
Yeah. Personally, not very much, but yeah, it's mainly because of what that says for our own prospects. But yeah, it's that it too is another really interesting subject there. It's like if we are going to end up becoming machines before we have a chance to become a spacefaring civilization, at least within our own solar system, it's like, yeah, that is a very steep curve of progress. And yeah, I kind of like my flesh and blood body, right?
I think it'll be sort of like getting tattoos or something like that. Some people might do it and might go for it, but other people won't. And I think that's holds also true for, say, going to Mars. I've thought it through, and there is absolutely no way I'm going to Mars, But there are
Yeah.
people that, I also would say that about climbing Mount Everest, but there are people that do climb Mount Everest. So there will be people that go to Mars. And I think it's about the most exciting period of time that we could live in, because it looks like that's actually possible now, at least through things like SpaceX.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And remind me when we're done here. I need to send you a book, because that's exactly what I thought too. They're about human augmentation and space travel and all that stuff. And basically, yes, there's going to be a lot of people who choose to forego all that. And what's life going to be like for them if and when the world in fact gets caught up in that kind of post-singularity trend, right? And if space exploration becomes a totally viable thing, are they going to feel like they need to basically run away from Earth in order to get away from it? That is a very interesting prospect, and yeah, it's something I definitely want to explore.
That was always one of the scenarios with artificial intelligence, is that everybody expects this thing to wake up and be a malevolent immortal dictator or whatever, but it's just as possible that it might just say bye and launch itself into space, and we never hear from it again.
Yep. And yeah, it will in fact take over in a completely benign way and say, I can do all this better than you can, so just leave it with me. And we get so bored that we end up having to walk away and find new challenges.
Or it'll just be absurd. And as soon as the artificial intelligence comes into being, it immediately shuts itself off, because it concludes that there's no point to existing. So it just every time we build one, it shuts off.
Yeah. That's a perfectly viable possibility there. There's another actually revolutionary change that's been happening lately, and it's what's been taking place with radio astronomy. And just recently, actually, I had a chance to look at their lunar exploration program, and how, again, pronunciation here, not sure, but the Queequeg satellite, the orbiter element of their Chang'e 4 mission, and how it has a special instrument on it that allows it to conduct radio astronomy on the far side of the moon. And this is the people who built it there, they're very excited about this now, because it just deployed its radio antennas. And it's going to be able to sense parts of the radio spectrum that correspond to the earliest days of the universe, right? Which our telescopes can't see that far, and that's the cosmic era known as the Dark Ages. But if you can access just the right area of the radio spectrum, it's like you could actually look back to the time when the first stars would be forming, and the first star clusters would be coming together and all that stuff. And that's one mission there that's going to be able to do that. There's also the radio telescope there that is a Murchison Wide Field Array, is what it's called there. And that is coming online too, as far as I know, in Western Australia. And we've got another array in British Columbia there that's conducting radio astronomy too, looking for fast radio bursts. But I do think that in the future it's probably going to be looking at the earliest periods of the earliest part of cosmic history there. And the fact that we can now do that as well, that is, to me, is really exciting. And just something I heard about the other day. So that's something that, I'd really like to see where that goes, because that too would be yet another major astronomical revolution there, right? And one of several that's happened in a pretty short space of time.
And we have to take a break. We'll be back in just a moment with Universe Today's Matt Williams.
Be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. And now, back to John.
And we're back with Universe Today's Matt Williams. Now, Matt, you're a nuts and bolts sort of sci-fi writer. You're envisioning a future solar system with people. Now, what we're actually going to do this now. We're increasingly going to head into space, and we have all of these amazing initiatives by SpaceX and Blue Origin and Bigelow and others. What's the first step? What is the first step in the human future for colonizing the solar system?
Well, the first step would be colonizing low Earth orbit, and that's universally pretty much agreed to there. That we will need to establish habitation modules in low Earth orbit. We're going to have to definitely build some like assembly and maintenance yards up there, because if we ever want to start mining asteroids and going to space with regular frequency, then we need the ability to launch from orbit, right? So basically, let's build space planes that can take people or cargo up there and then put them onto something else, which will then take them to the moon and beyond. So yeah, we got to build a lot of infrastructure in low Earth orbit first, and that is happening right now as we speak. And yeah, there's a lot of commercial entities that are looking to do that. And Bigelow Aerospace, which you mentioned, they're one such group. They want to do the inflatable modules. Yeah, that's likely to expand from there. We're likely to see people living in orbit, I think, someday in large numbers. And from there, yeah, the moon is the next logical step. We will need infrastructure in orbit there too, for ships to dock and people to go up and down from those to the surface. It's like basically you don't want to launch from a gravity well out into space unless you have to. So yeah, create reusable vehicles that can take you just to orbit, and then from there board a spaceship, and that'll take you out into space. So yeah, after the moon, and there will need to be refueling and resource operations on the surface that can create fuel and bring it up to orbit and mine helium-3 and other things and make that available. So, and then from there, you're now heading to Mars. And yeah, if space station orbit is a good idea, putting some infrastructure there on Phobos and Deimos is also a pretty good idea. And then, yeah, from there, you then hop down to the surface, and that will be where we can establish a Martian colony. And yeah, once you've done that, then yeah, it's like the next logical step. Okay, now we can start thinking about Venus and the asteroid belt. And so yeah, the obvious first step is colonize orbit, because Earth's gravity is probably the single greatest hurdle to space exploration that we have. It's like once you tackle that and you make that cost effective, well, then you can start dealing with the next one, which is just the sheer distance.
Now, in defeating Earth's gravity, what do you think about the concept of a space elevator? Do you think it's viable, or do you think that's just something that will never happen?
I really hope it does, because I love the idea so very, very much. I have argued that it will happen. It does need a revolution in material science, but that's something that realistically we can anticipate. So I think a space elevator is going to be a long-term solution, and I think that I hope that we see similar things like a lunar elevator and a Martian elevator, and that once those are in place there too, it's like, well, now we're able to transport people from the surface of multiple bodies to orbit, and then off they go. So yeah, I do think that that will be possible if ever we find that Earth just can't handle one. It's the gravity is just too strong, and there's too many unforeseen problems. I would say, okay, let's build one on the moon then. There's no sense in us not taking advantage of that much there. If Earth's gravity is a problem, then let's build them on other places, and at least that way we can get stuff off the surface there cheaply and easily and regularly, and and then fly it into Earth orbit and then just bust it down bit by bit. But I think one will happen eventually.
The interesting thing about the space elevator is that's really, really inexpensive to operate, because you essentially, once you get the elevator to orbit, when it comes back down, you get all the energy back, or most of it, most of it that you've put into it. So it makes for as cheap of a launch system, and it's probably shouldn't even call it a launch system, but as cheap as it can get. And also permanent, because you can maintenance the thing. You don't have to constantly build new space elevators. You just build one, and then you have it for all time. The question is, as you mentioned, though, are the materials. But we have some hope there, you know, and graphenes and things like that. So you also mentioned, too, something that's equally important is that you can build these at the moon and you can build these at Mars, and it solves the same problem at those places as well. So eventually there may be no rockets, or very few of them. Eventually. Now, what's your view on Elon Musk and SpaceX wanting to just jump to Mars and bypass the moon? Do you think that that's probably not the right way to do it, or is it?
I'd say it's not the way to do it, personally. And yeah, I know that I agree. That's totally what he's looking at there, to develop the spaceship, the Starship rather, in such a way that they will launch from Earth, refuel in orbit, and then fly all the way to Mars, and then ship comes back. And it's like, yeah, so every 2 years we're going to launch a Starship, and I do not see how that would be cost effective or profitable. And it's like, this is a perfectly sound idea if you're going to do a flotilla and do a one-way trip to colonize Mars. But yeah, I'm one of those people who thinks that like a Mars direct mission is not a good idea. So yeah, I would say the real goal here is to build a Starship that can go launch from Earth and rendezvous with the station in orbit around the moon, refuel there, and drop passengers off there, and then they can board the deep space transport or some other system and go from there. Yeah. If I were Elon Musk, or if I was in part of SpaceX, I would say perhaps we should be building the Starship and then using that to deliver the components of a SpaceX station, around the moon. And while we're at it, let's deliver one to low Earth orbit. And that way, we don't even need to fly all the way to the moon. We just need to go to orbit, drop people off there, and then they take a reusable shuttle, basically the same way they did in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Right? The more space stations and infrastructure you have, the easier it's going to be to make return trips, and the cheaper those trips are going to be.
Now, this is invariably going, as we do this, as we expand out off of this planet, this invariably is going to cause legal problems, probably a legal nightmare as we work out what space law is going to look like. Yeah. But also things like these micronations that want to go into space and basically become their own country.
Yeah.
So that seems factional to me.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The factions are already forming up.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah, and I do think there's a strong chance that'll happen there, and it's going to be part of the future where we've got just all these like distributed governments, right? Or all these just micro governments, and it's like, yeah, if all these nations can get registered and we can come up with some sort of common system there, well, that's fine. Okay, not the end of the world, but yeah, I think it's also likely that at a certain point, it's like, well, if you build a station up there and form your own nation, then, well, you've got several other nations also up there. Sooner or later, isn't somebody going to say, let's do a LEO alliance or something, right? Or a confederation of low Earth orbit nations or something? Yeah, the United Nations of Orbit.
One has to wonder, though, if the Earth governments, which seem to want to militarize space pretty badly, is going to allow any of this.
Yeah, and that could very well be the next struggle for independence. And yeah, I think the odds of that happening too are not that bad. That if we do end up colonizing the moon, Mars, and other planets, that they're basically either Earth is going to have to. The governments of Earth are going to have to understand in advance that sooner or later they're going to want to represent themselves and have a seat at the table with the UN. So probably best that we just let them, rather than trying to dictate what people do in the off-world colonies, because Yeah, we saw how that turned out. It didn't work out so well last time.
No.
Yeah.
No. So what are you looking forward to most as far as coming space missions? And I'll tell you mine already.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Titan copter.
Oh,
That's the one that has really gotten me going. What about you?
well, I'm very fascinated with that one. Yeah, so definitely that. I would say probably the Europa Clipper, and hopefully missions that follow-up missions that spawns, because I'm really eager for them to finally get some samples of water coming out of that moon, and tell us definitively that yes, there's life down there. And it could just be microbes, or it could be something, basic and aquatic. Yeah, looking forward to that one there. And the thought that and the Titan copter and other missions like that are in the near future is really exciting.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it coming up. And I certainly, definitely am intrigued by Europa's ocean.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what intrigues me even more is you look at Europa and you see all these dark streaks and tholins and all these sort of colored materials. And then you look at Enceladus, which is much younger, and you don't see that. You just see ice.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference between these two apparently very similar moons? Could that be life related? Could it be a hint that Europa may have something going on?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited for that as well. I don't know if Europa Clipper will be able to characterize that life or not, but it'll certainly tell us a lot about the ocean that's down there.
Yeah.
And the conditions of it.
Yeah. The pragmatist in me says that the Clipper will find evidence that life could be down there. It won't find anything definitive. They'll get a read on, the plume activity and stuff on the surface that says, oh yeah, all the chemical elements that are necessary are down there, but we're going to have to wait to either send in a submarine or something that can land right on the surface, get just right next to a geyser and grab the water as it's coming out and to examine it. That's or not the pragmatist, the realist. But even so, it's like, well, that's a step in the right direction, and that's very neat. So that's good enough.
Indeed it is. And we are out of time. Today I was joined by Matt Williams of Universe Today and author of The Jovian Manifesto.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Where do you think we are headed? Where will the state of space exploration be in 20 years? Will we have habitats in orbit around Earth on a scale dwarfing the International Space Station? Will we have a Mars colony? What of the moon? I can't wait to watch it all unfold. Anna, what is that noise?
I'm contacting Comet Borisov.
You did that with oumuamua. Do any of these things ever respond?
Not typically well, no, John.
What? You're an AI. You're robocalling interstellar objects?
Wait until you see the telephone bill.
And you said the cost of my beard maintenance is a problem. And next week, folks, we have a very special show indeed. I spoke to none other than Dr. Jerry Ehman, the man who discovered a mysterious signal in 1977 at Ohio State University's Big Ear Radio Telescope and wrote the word WOW on the printout. To this day, the WOW signal remains a mystery and represents the one time in the history of SETI where we may have actually detected an alien transmission. It's a deep rabbit hole indeed. See you then.